I've been calling myself an extreme dramatist for a while, which may sound a bit pretentious, but I'm sticking with it. And I think that the films I've been doing over the last 10 or so years have been, even though they've been very much liked and well loved, I'd like to think, by the horror audience, that they're dramas which go to a kind of logical conclusion of violence, really. And they've often used character development and stuff in a way that not every horror film does. So for me, this really feels like a natural extension of what I've done, and I think for any kind of red-blooded male filmmaker, we all love Goodfellas and we all love The Godfather and many other gangster films, and so to be able to do a gangster film for me is amazing, and this opportunity came along, and as again happens to be I think the third film out of 4 that I've done, which is based on true life characters, and reading the characters, they had incredibly rich life, and so there's a ton of dramatic pickings there to be chosen and fought over and captured on film. There's a man called Jez Vernon who was the MD of Metrodome Pictures. And he's someone I've met up with a few times and got on well with, and he's been trying to get something for me to do with him, and he's friends with Terry, and I think he at some point said, you've got to meet Simon. Simon's a great director, a great guy, and so Terry and I met up, and Jez by this stage had given me the script, and I met up and said, I'm interested in this. I'd like to do a bit of work on the rewriting of it, and it kind of went from there, really. But yeah, that was October, and I think that first meeting, Tara was like, yeah, well, I want you to do it, and really from October to now, which is end of March, no, actually April. Yeah, we've been working together on the film. Well, I think initially the script was more about Billy Hill's character, and it was more about his rise, really. And having, as research, I read biography of Billy Hill, biography of Jack Spott, and a couple of other things, and there was a book about both of them. And I actually found that Jack's story was in some respects more interesting, because there's more kind of hubris there, and there's more, kind of almost Shakespearean elements. But Billy's was a lot of robberies, and at some point it seemed like he suddenly became king of the underworld. So I thought, having both their stories together, and the conflict between them both was an immediately much more attractive proposition for a storyline of an extreme drama. So I added a lot of Jack Spott in really from the beginning, turned him into a not kind of secondary character, but turned him into the kind of co-lead. And so with that, there's a lot more tension between them, a lot more conflict, a lot more drama, and we have a lot more about Jack's life, which includes his wife Rita, and his wife Rita, of course, was instrumental in really changing these guys' lives, because she's the person at the end who actually stands up in court and testifies against Frankie Fraser and Bobby Warren, amongst others, and that really feels like the end of the story in many respects. So I added her. There's a character called Tiger Lily who's quite fun. So just kind of enriching, Jack's characterization quite a bit, and I think Billy's as well. Yeah, I think inevitably if you do a film, you want to recognize the characters, empathize with them, and that they can still be essentially, flawed characters or even, anti-heroes, but there's something about them that you still find you want to watch. Wolf of Wall Street being a recent example of that, where the guy is obviously rather reprehensible, but you watch it and it's an amazingly entertaining 3 or whatever hours, and you come away thinking, well, that guy did wrong, but he had style and charisma in what he did. And I think this is the same. It's like, we want, I'd like the audience to come away thinking, yeah, I think those guys are pretty interesting. I'd like to know more about them. I'd like to meet them in real life. But nonetheless, you take a step back from that, and you because of what we've shown, that they are, they're essentially amoral or immoral, probably amoral actually. They commit crimes against normal people, So there's some things in the script that we've really tried to make it that we do see some of the effects of their crimes on the actual people who they on the victims, really. Not very much, but just a little bit to bring it back, so it's not completely going, these guys are amazing, because I don't think anyone else really wants to 100% glamorize or glorify criminals. Yeah, I mean, in a funny way, in my other films, there's probably been more an embodiment of tension and escalating kind of unease. I think with this, there's so much going on that it's more a story, really. It's a story with a lot of going on, and it's not necessarily, the focus isn't specifically on the tension. Well, it is on the tension between the two characters, but it's also their journey, their story, and I think the story is more important than that kind of unease between them. But because I think that would be more, in a way, a kind of TV series. Because in the reality of the timeline that we're doing, this story actually takes place over about 15 years, from about 36 to about 53, I think. Yeah, it's more just getting in the ups and downs. But that said, that there is some violence. Obviously we need some violence. Try to put some pretty hardcore violence in it, so that when there's more violence which is threatened or insinuated or just happens, the audience knows that it's not going to be nice violence. It's going to be proper. It's going to be hurt. And one thing that we've done in this is really kind of, in reality, much like in real life violence, one or two hits and you're on the floor. And rather than many films, you see, back and forth fights, and no one seems to get hurt, and they just carry on fighting. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple of Terry's films, and I think he's got a good naturalism and stuff, and we discussed it, and it's and that discussion went from the discussion, well, went into the reality that we are now. And Leo, again, I've been a fan of his work for a long time. I think he's got a great naturalism, great charisma, and I think that just suits Billy Hill down to the ground, really. And I think as a pairing, when you're casting, it's not just about casting, character A and character B, and that being it. It's really thinking how they spar off of each other. And sometimes in casting that's hard, because there are financial reasons for casting one person and not another. But as much as possible, one tries to make the pairing of your leads dynamic in whatever way you're hoping it will be dynamic, whether it's a love story or something here. And I think I do think the pairing of the two together works very well, and we've Terry in real life is a charismatic guy, but we've got him to kind of lose a lot of that charisma, I think, in the role, and we've got Leo to kind of amp up his charisma a little bit. So all part of the tricks of the trade, I guess. Well, I think there's a few reasons why people, I would hope, would go and see this. First and foremost, like any of the best films, is just an amazing story, and it really has tragedy and drama coming out of the ears. And it's a non-stop film. I think it's going to be like most of my films. I think it's quite relentless. We don't do many kind of shots of things which aren't really relevant to the actual story. So I think it'll be very pacey. I would hope that it'd be quite emotionally exhausting. But yeah, it's a real life story about an England that wasn't that long ago in terms of where we are in history, which I really don't think hardly any of the audience are going to know. And so certainly when I read it, I was like, I really was shocked that I hadn't heard of these guys at all, because they in their time they were so big. And they were the equivalent of the Krays, and they were to the 40s and 50s what the Krays were to the 60s. But for some reason, British history seems to have absolutely cut them out of the cultural and gangster-ish kind of history. So I think people are going to be surprised actually, and actually excited to find that in our cultural treasure trove there are these men who existed. who no one knows about. It's the missing link between Peaky Blinders and Legend and the Krays, because it really is. It includes the Sabini family who are at the end of Peaky Blinders, and it ends up with the Krays, who obviously then go on to become kings of the underworld themselves, and we've got a bit of Frankie Fraser in the middle. So it's and to be honest, the title it's quite a magnanimous title, and of course one doesn't want to go into that lightly, because we're going to always be compared with obviously the Sergio Leone film, but I think it really does make sense, because it really is how British kind of criminal history was born, really.